This past weekend, my fiancée, Emily, and I were looking forward to a cozy evening at home. We lived in a peaceful suburban neighborhood just outside the city, with a picturesque Presbyterian church and cemetery across the street from our house. Most nights, it was a quiet and serene setting. But this particular evening had an unexpected twist. As we settled down on the couch for a night of movies and relaxation, we heard the obnoxious barking of a dog coming from one of our neighbors' houses. It was the most raucous and annoying dog we had ever encountered, and it shattered the tranquility of the evening. Frustrated but determined to address the issue, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Leaving Emily on the couch, I stepped outside and made my way across the street toward our neighbor's house. As I approached their front door, I realized that nobody was home. I hesitated for a moment, contemplating my next move. I considered leaving a note or returning home, but something urged me to investigate further. Walking around to the backyard, where the dog was presumably causing all the commotion, I discovered an open gate leading into the cemetery, behind the church. The barking grew louder as I got closer, and I could see the silhouette of the dog near a gravestone. It was as if the dog sensed my presence and abruptly stopped barking. Curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously moved toward the dog, hoping to calm it down. As I approached, the dog sat down and stared in the direction of a nearby gravestone. I followed its gaze and froze in terror. There, behind the gravestone, stood a figure drenched in blood. My heart pounded in my chest as I took in the ghastly sight. The person's face was streaked with crimson, and in their hand, they held a menacing dagger. The dog's bark became more frenzied, sensing the danger that lay before us. Panic gripped me, and I glanced back at our house, where Emily stood outside, bewildered by the scene unfolding. In a moment of clarity, I urgently yelled at Emily to call the police. Confused but aware of the urgency in my voice, she rushed inside to dial emergency services. Meanwhile, I kept my eyes on the figure, fully prepared to defend myself if necessary. The menacing person took a few steps in our direction, but then, inexplicably, they halted. A mixture of relief and bewilderment washed over me as the person turned around and retreated toward the back of the cemetery, disappearing into the surrounding woods. It felt like an eternity until the police arrived, during which I recounted the chilling encounter to skeptical officers who were hesitant to believe my story. Nevertheless, they diligently searched the area as I recounted the details to Emily. When the police concluded their search, finding no trace of the mysterious person, Emily and I felt a lingering sense of unease. We locked all the doors and windows, wary of any potential threat. I decided to contact our neighbors and inform them about the unsettling incident before returning to our movie night. Although our peace of mind was forever shaken, about 2.5 years ago, I found myself at my friend's house. It was a winter break, and we were looking for something to do on a snowy night. There were 4 of us. We were always fascinated by the afterlife and enjoyed discussing topics like ghosts. That night, we decided to visit an isolated graveyard on the outskirts of town to see if it was haunted. It was an old cemetery rumored to be the resting place of gypsies, with no recent burials since 1920. It was around 2 a.m. when we piled into my car and made our way to the graveyard. The road leading to it was quiet, dimly lit by the moon, and surrounded by woods. As we drove north, the cemetery appeared on the right side, while a small patch of grass on the left was just big enough for my car. A passing car caught our attention momentarily, but we shrugged it off and eagerly anticipated a thrilling experience. After parking, we hesitated for a moment, questioning the sanity of our decision. But curiosity got the better of us, and we ventured out of the car, crossing the street towards the cemetery. A small staircase led us up to the graveyard, perched on a hilly area. Ted had brought a voice recorder, hoping to capture any supernatural encounters. He and Bob headed towards the back of the cemetery, while Dan and I stayed closer to the entrance, marveling at the eerie ambience. That's when we noticed a set of headlights approaching. It was the same Jeep we had seen earlier, a late 90s model, and it parked on the adjacent road, blocking my car. The occupant rolled down the window and began blasting strange, satanic-sounding music. Time seemed to stretch as we stood frozen, terrified by this unexpected turn of events. After what felt like an eternity, the Jeep finally drove off, and we breathed a sigh of relief. Despite this unsettling encounter, our curiosity outweighed our fear. We resumed exploring the graveyard, searching for any signs of paranormal activity. However, our sense of security was short-lived. The Jeep made another pass, honking its horn as it flew by. Panic set in, and we realized the situation's severity. We rushed back to my car, determined to escape the increasingly disturbing events. Unfortunately, my small car proved to be a challenge in the snowy conditions. After some struggle, we managed to break free and hit the road, accelerating as fast as we could. We drove for several miles, desperately hoping we had lost our pursuer. But suddenly, a pair of headlights illuminated behind us. The Jeep had been following us with its lights off, undetected until now. In a nerve-wracking moment, the Jeep pulled alongside us, matching our speed. The driver hurled something at my car, causing a loud thud. Though it left no visible damage, the impact added to our mounting fear. The Jeep then sped up, positioning itself in front of us, creating distance as if to leave us alone. But our relief was short-lived. Without warning, the Jeep abruptly slammed on its brakes, nearly causing an accident. Thinking quickly, I maneuvered around it and veered onto a smaller road closer to town. We prayed that this would finally shake off our pursuer. Miraculously, we managed to lose sight of the Jeep and raced back to the safety of my friend's house. Trembling with fear and confusion. To this day, we remain uncertain about what truly transpired that night. Perhaps it was simply an aggressive driver, teenagers pulling a prank, or someone with sinister intentions. The experience left us shaken, reminding us to be cautious even in our pursuit of the unknown. This incident occurred to a relative of mine, whom I'll refer to as Dave. Dave, along with his wife, were newly married in their 20s when this peculiar event took place. They often included Dave's younger cousin in their outings, since she lived in a rural area with few children her age. On the cousin's 13th birthday, she wished to have a sleepover, and it was agreed that it would be held at Dave's house. She invited 5 of her closest friends, and Dave and his wife happily joined in the youthful festivities. Always ready to act like kids themselves. Later that night, seeking an adventurous thrill, they decided to visit a nearby graveyard. In our small town, the graveyards were situated amidst dense woods, away from any residential areas. The particular graveyard they chose was small, enclosed by a chain-link fence, with a solitary streetlight near the entrance gate. Presumably, the caretaker had installed the light to discourage teenagers from engaging in nighttime activities there. Exiting the car, Dave, his wife, and the 6 girls roamed around the graveyard, laughing, joking, and playfully scaring one another with ghost stories. After some time, their light-hearted escapade grew weary, prompting them to return to Dave's house. They all piled back into his vintage 70s car, with the girls settling in the back, and Dave and his wife occupying the front seats. Engrossed in conversation and silliness, the females were startled by a tapping sound on the driver's side window. It wasn't a gentle knock, but rather a metallic ting-ting-ting, produced by a light, metal object. All eyes turned towards the window, only to witness a man standing there, brandishing a machete. Dave and his wife described him as resembling Rambo, shirtless, with a cloth tied around his head, and his face painted with green and brown camouflage, akin to army maneuvers. Initially assuming the man might need assistance, Dave began opening his door, but his wife and the girls erupted into screams. Diving towards the door in a panic, the girls clambered over the seats. His wife stretched across the seat, and they frantically locked all the doors. Meanwhile, the stranger engaged in strange martial arts-like movements, twirling the machete and executing a few kicks. Swiftly, Dave started the car and hastily drove away, with the terrified cries of the girls and his wife urging him to escape the scene. The bizarre encounter left them rattled, and they resolved to return to the graveyard later that night. Ensuring the doors remained locked and staying inside the car. On their second visit, they believed they spotted someone lying on one of the graves towards the rear of the graveyard. Although it could have been a trick of the lighting, to this day, the identity of that mysterious individual remains unknown. It is speculated that he may have been under the influence of drugs or suffering from a severe mental illness. The unnerving thought that this enigmatic figure was possibly lurking in the graveyard, observing their earlier laughter and unawareness, sent shivers down their spines.